So this session is being delivered on behalf of people that might have slightly less of an understanding of the retrofit market, and for those that might have a bit more of a longer term view and have been in it for a while, to try and get across some of the elements of a retrofit that will help landlords and those supporting landlords to understand a bit more about the digital tools and the capabilities of some of the other experts that are out there in helping the low carbon retrofit journey from the point of potentially no knowledge all the way through to some actual work having happened and you being happy about it. The reason for that is really for us to get to a point where we want to encourage bidders for the social housing decarbonisation funds to be, rather than just putting a bid in to try and get some money to do some work, they're approaching this as a mature learning exercise, so that there's some thinking about the real lessons that could be learned, and how actually this particular exercise is only a stepping stone on to a bigger machine, if you like, of decarbonising housing stock over the next 30 years. And on that basis, we know that the important factors within that kind of mature approach will be where the data has come from that helps you make decisions, the parameters within which you're working in order to push those decisions forward, and to, if you like, leave some things out that you might want to deal with later. Scoping of the work once you have an understanding of strategically the things you want to do, and how to involve contractors and at what stage, so that everyone that's involved in all that has got a really good understanding of where they're meant to be, what they're meant to do, and what good looks like through that process. I want to start off by just saying there is a big difference between all of the houses that might be involved. Here's a diagram that explains in a nutshell how houses can differ. These are 40 houses that we worked with nearly 10 years ago now as a trial, as part of the lead up to the ill-fated Green Deal. We analysed in depth 40 houses that were built within a mile of each other. So in other words, the weather was the same. They're all of the same age, of the same archetype, built around about 1900. So Victorian properties, all of which performed, if you looked at the energy performance certificate, in exactly the same way. And because the EPC automates its recommendations, they're all recommended to have the same thing. However, if you look at the pie chart that's on the screen there, each of those buildings, in terms of its size, that's the annual energy bill, and its content, in terms of the key on the left there, are completely unique. So we're dealing with, if you like, a data infrastructure that's very, very cumbersome, and you can almost argue that it's misinformation. Yet, if you start to lift up the lid on what you've actually got, do some proper surveys, decent data, and start to wade in with a bit more analysis than you might do just having a cursory glance at this stage in the process, you'll really start to see that there are different directions you need to head in virtually all these different properties, and that's kind of where we're coming from with this topic. To start with, there may be much more data available to you than you actually realise, and once you've got good data, you can start to really chew it in a much better way. Unfortunately, this industry is lagging behind many other industries in terms of the way it uses data and explores ways to be much more effective in the way that you use it, analyse it, and not just in terms of knowing what to do, but how to do it. And data exists in the housing stock, but it's really not often used in a way that adds value to the process, and obviously the quality can vary. The obvious one is that many people are critical of the energy performance certificate market and the variability of the quality of surveyors. But I think a lot of that is potentially down to the client not necessarily asking for the things that they really want, just getting it done as a box to tick. So actually specifying things in the right way means you actually get better data as well. Often opportunities are missed. So what could be done at the same time as planned works, be it reactionary maintenance, or carrying out the work on voids? Are we just trying to get all those works done as quickly as possible, or are we trying to be mature about the fact that we really only have a 30-year deadline to get all of our retrofit done in the UK? And we've got trigger points to deal with as well. So house moves, tenants moving in and out. Opportunities arise such that when grants and subsidies are available, if you don't know about the planned works, you don't have good data, you're not really aware of the things that are coming up. You may not make best use of those grants and subsidies, and that's exactly where we're coming from with this session. Now, the social housing decarbonisation budget is trying to come up with a model for really scaling up retrofit in a much quicker way than it has to date, and much more accurate in a way that means we don't have to go back over and do it all again in a few years' time. So clearly, back to my earlier point, EPC data is not enough. It can be potentially out of date quite quickly. It could be out of date within 24 hours if some work's being done. So it's about trying to have a mechanism that, brings the latest data in, and recommendations on that basis are therefore mature, they're up to date, and not just in terms of what to do, but how much it will cost. So the inaccurate pricing can be moved out of this. If you get this process done well, and a contractor's brought into it as well, it would significantly reduce the cost they might have in surveying and pricing for works. And asset managers themselves generally have more data than they realise. Okay, the energy performance certificate itself, when you look at the document, well, there's not much on it. You would think there are a few things that can be used though when tied with other bits of information that are useful. And of course, it would be lovely if whoever's paid for the EPC might actually have the right to access the data behind it. Unfortunately, that's not quite the case at this moment in time, which is crazy, but it needs to be changed. But there you have it. Boiler service records have a lot of information on it. Electrical checks, records of work, stock condition surveys. They all have bits of data, some of which overlap, some of which are maybe collated in slightly different ways. However, when you bring them all together, you start to get quite a rounded picture of all the things that have happened in those properties to date. Supply chain partners, if you set up the scope of their work in the right way, they might be collecting information that they can share with you that can really, depixelate, if you like, the picture you have of the housing stock, so you can really start to understand a lot more. And generally, I mean, how do you compartmentalise the knowledge that your members of staff, even the RLOs, have of the houses themselves? How do you start to engage with them in one particular database? But the final point there, the quality of the data is very much dependent on the source, the user, how old it is, etc. So you almost need to put a confidence score against each of those bits of data, really whether it's worth using it. And if you at least have that awareness, you've got an identification of that confidence, you really know how to use it going forward. So digital tools can serve several purposes, really. Of course, if we're moving toward net zero, we want to be able to get rid of any means of heating and lighting a property that has any fossil fuel at all. It might well be that if you decide that to do analysis of your housing stock, and putting heat pumps into every property might be the least cost route to get into net zero for you. But actually, what about the people that live in there that really can't even afford to heat their house now with a gas boiler? They're still heating their house with some expenditure. Nothing is improved there. So really, we look at the homes as a whole. A whole house plan is the phrase that we use, understanding the mix of all the things that need to be done: heating, insulation, air tightness, all those sort of things that need to work in combination to make it a house that's better for the tenant as well as the landlord, so that ultimately you're having an impact that benefits both. But then we might be moving towards standards. What are we actually aiming for as a whole? Wouldn't it be lovely if we all had a standard that the government had set that was equitable and meant that it was an understandable and something that we could really start to plan towards rather than setting our own? And then stakeholders, of course. And more of this is about actually taking those first three blocks then and saying, okay, we have a plan, we're working towards a standard. Then you want to communicate that with stakeholders, because some of those stakeholders are in your way. They might be roadblocks to change. So provided you have all the information to hand, based on good data, you can really start to work very well with people inside and outside of the organisation. So this is about spotting the whole journey. Understanding the stock is one thing, and that's one thing that we do every day. But there are two elements to this. When you want to understand your housing stock and you've got some data on that housing stock, only the first part of that journey really is to take that data and understand the baseline. In other words, what you've got, what's in that property, and what your EPC score might be. That's really the first base. It doesn't really tell you very much about what your options are. So the next stage really is to take that data and run what if scenarios on that data. Once you've got the cost of what those measures might be to upgrade, and you understand with each of those measures, depending on what the calculation methodology might be in the background, you can work out for each measure installed, you can work out how much money is saved, what the carbon emission savings might be, and you can start to understand as you overlay measures upon measures what the cost will be to reach certain targets, whether they be carbon targets or SAP targets or whatever. That's the really interesting part of this stuff. And then you can start to say, okay, well, what's the cost per ton of carbon that we're setting ourselves as a budget, if you like, for our particular transformational program. You can start to look at portfolio subsets within your entire housing stock to start to see, okay, well, if we've got a target to aim for, there might be some money, such as the whole social housing decarbonisation fund, that means that we've got 300 properties that we can really go at together. And once you've got that understanding, you can go forward strategically together with a lot of confidence. But you've still got a question hanging. What's been done before in this property? You might be telling yourself what's been done right now. What's been done in recent years, because you might have staff to understand it, and you might have some idea of a database that's telling you what's been done. But since then, are there any inherent building issues to solve, such as asbestos and damp? And what are the planned works that are going forward? This really does take a lot of time, which is why there's been a lot of thinking going into the notion of building passports, building up a database that can really understand what has happened previously. And this, for asset managers, is something that ought to be grounded in sort of the daily work, really, in understanding how to record all this stuff, to dip into a journey for that property. But passports is something that's being developed by a number of people across Europe as well, to understand really what would help decision makers for any property, not just rented properties, how you can take that building from a position it's in right now, go through a process such as the PAS 2035 standards, such that it's not just about what you do, but how you go through it with certain people saying whether things are appropriate or not. And then you're putting in place a medium-term retrofit plan, which represents the needs of the whole building and the occupants, not just the building itself. And in some instances, some people's definition of a building passport stops there. However, really what we ought to be doing is thinking about this in terms of projecting forward. So, for all stakeholders to engage with, as we mentioned on the last slide, but effectively you're getting to a point where you want to bridge tenancies and bridging ownership. So what happens when maybe you've got to a second phase in the project and you're handing over to a new owner? How does that new owner understand extremely quickly what's been done already and what a net zero plan might be for them, without having to go through all that process again of surveying and engaging with contractors and all that kind of stuff? That's the notion of building passports that's really coming to the fore. I'd commend people on the call to this document that was been written by the Green Finance Institute and partners within the Coalition for the Energy Efficiency of Buildings, which it's freely available to download, which really understands, it sets out in particular from the aspects of finance providers, what they would wish to see in a building passport, so they're willing to part with cash. And quite a lot of that as well is a bullet point that perhaps I've not put on here, but how the performance of the actual building, once it's been completed, can filter through. The data from the performance itself can be overlaid with the information that's been collected in the earlier decision-making process to see whether you've actually made the right decisions in the first place, which is not something we should hide. If we've got a mature industry that's moving forward together, we really need to understand this stuff in combination. And just to give you an idea of how it might this might be projected, this is one particular page of the whole house plans that we do for individual dwellings. Imagine a phase plan is only part of sort of the infrastructure of the overall building passport, really. So you need to be thinking this kind of information. Well, who else needs to know? What happens when the property changes hands? Imagine you're in between phase 1 and phase 2 here. In other words, you've carried out some insulation and ventilation work, and the property's changed. Well, you want to make sure, if you want to speed up the process, increase the accuracy, reduce the cost on behalf of an air source heat pump installer, they will want to know with a high degree of accuracy which walls have been insulated, which bits of the building have been ventilated, so that they can design their system to accommodate in a way that's not oversized or the controls are set in the right way, for instance. And it's really important for us as an industry that we make sure that all of these things are done almost in an automation of decisions, really. Logic moves through this kind of structure once it's in place. because we do not have very long to make all these decisions really and to get this stuff done. And importantly, this is a model that needs to be updated. For instance, as this work does happen, somebody could log on even to a platform where they can see their own dwelling, can see what's been done in the past with confidence, knowing what they're going to be going through in the future. So just to finalise this, is sort of the size of the problem. This is some work I did for the Construction Leadership Council in a final report that came out in July of this year. The National Retrofit Programme is predicting, you can see 2021 here, this is the number of people that need to come in, need to be working in our industry in order to hit the net zero target for the existing housing stock of the UK. If we're in a position where every time somebody changes hands or we think about a new particular part of the process for building, we have to go back to the drawing board, look at what's been done and replan, resurvey, go out for quotes again. We are never going to get to the point where we can be renovating effectively, cheaply and accurately. We're looking at another 450 to 500,000 people coming into this industry. We do not have the time. We haven't got the capability to get all these people up to speed extremely quickly with doing their own things in isolation as the industry works right now. We need something to bring it all together, and certainly the building passport notion is one of those things. And a key ingredient of that are the asset management systems and the surveyors and the contractors that already exist within the frameworks of social housing providers. So it's one of the key things to bear in mind, and we're looking forward to having looking forward to seeing how different bidders might take on that particular challenge themselves as they start to embark on their journey with the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund.